Let's look at SQLLoader Express mode in 12C. So to set up the demo, I have created a table called students. So it is 4 columns. SQLLoader Express mode supports number, varchar2 and date only, no other data types. There's a table called students and the data file called students.dat. The table name and the data file name should match. The data file extension should be .dat. Within the data file, all the columns used should match the columns in the table. Because in Express mode, we do not create a control file which defines the mapping of data file columns to table columns. So there should be a one-to-one correspondence between data file columns and table columns. To do the load, we need to create a directory. So we have a logical directory called SQLLoad mapped to a physical directory called Home Oracle Desktop SQLLoad. For Express mode, the directory names do not have to be exactly these. They could be any directory names, but they should be directories. Then we grant permissions on the directory. So we have a logical directory called SQLLoad mapped to a physical directory, and read permissions and write permissions. Similarly, we have a table called students and a data file called students.dat with the correspondence between the columns in the data file and the columns in the table. So now we run SQLLoader. On the command line, we just specify the table name, and it will expect the table and the column, the data file to match what we defined on the command line. What the external table definition it creates is to match all the columns in the data file with the columns in the table that is actually present in the database. So it creates an external table definition for us, and it uses parallel DML to insert the rows. Here my data file has only 3 rows, so the overhead of creating the external table definition is noticeable. But if I were loading a few 100,000 rows or a couple of million rows, then the overhead of the external table definition would not be noticeable, and the time to load all those 100,000 rows or million rows with parallel DML would be quite quick. So here, because of the overhead, let's just wait for a while for the external table definition and the control file definition. We will see them both in the log file. So just a quick recap. We have physical directory, we have a logical directory, we have read and write permissions in the logical directory, we have a data file with the extension .dat, and we have a table. The table name and the data file name have to be the same. The column mapping in the table and the data file have to be the same. Okay, so the external table load for Express mode has completed. It has created 2 log files. Let's look at the first log file, students.log. So this is a standard SQLLoader log method. Here it shows us the column mapping by position, and then it shows us the control file definition that it has generated and used. And you can see that the control file is available for reuse as well. That's why it actually puts a mention that the control file is for possible reuse. So you could actually extend this control file if you want to reuse it for other table names. You can use the same syntax. You can add more columns, use the same syntax again. After the control file definition, it specifies that it has enabled parallel DML, and then it creates an external table. It gives the automatic name sys SQLLoader X and external, and the table name. So this external table definition is again following the standard syntax for external tables. Create table, columns, organization external, type Oracle loader. So it is going to use the SQL loader interface. The directory that we have created the data file in, the access parameters for the external table, the log file for the external table operations as well, and the name of the data file as a location. Students.dat is the name of the data file. Then after that it does a parallel DML insert into the table. So it's inserting into a regular table called students from an external table called SQLLoader ext students. So this external table is actually the dat file. It has loaded 3 rows and it also reports us what is the time taken. The other log file is for the external table operation itself. So this is a proper log file when you are using external table definitions. So it tells us about the data in the file, about reject row rules, and what are the fields in the data source. So there you have it. For SQL loader express mode, you need a data file with the .dat extension with the same name as the table, columns mapped to the table, number, varchar2, and date data types. You need a logical directory definition and read and write permissions on the directory definition. When you run SQL loader, you just specify the table on the command line and then maps the table with the external table, which is the data file of the same name, and creates two log files. One log file has the control file definition and external table definition. Both are available for reuse. If you want to extend them, if you want to reuse them for different data sets, you can reuse them. The second log file is the external table operation itself. This took a bit of time to load for only 3 rows because the time was spent on the external table definition and the control file definition. But if I had a few 100,000 rows or a million rows, then the load would have been much faster with parallel DML, and the overhead for the external table definition would not have been noticed.